A metal fork slipped from my hand and hit the tile with a sharp crack, just as the joke left Dylan's mouth. I was standing at the open door with a warm paper bag in my arms. The smell of fried rice and orange chicken curled into the hallway. On the porch, Mr. Liu's smile stalled, still polite, but his eyes flickered past my shoulder toward my son. I felt the air in the doorway turn heavy. Dylan leaned against the kitchen island, arms folded, half grinning, as if he had just said something clever instead of cruel. Sophie froze on the stairs with our cat pressed to her chest, her socked foot hanging over the last step. For a second, even the cat went still. "I'm so sorry," I said to Mr. Liu, the words scraping out of my throat. His gaze came back to me, and I watched him swallow something down. Not the food, not the evening. Something older. More tired than both. He nodded once, too gently, took the money with careful fingers, and handed me the receipt without looking at my son again. When the door finally shut, the echo of the latch sounded louder than his joke. "You're right, that was my mistake. The story must be written in English. I'll restart and give you the first section in English now, keeping everything else exactly as in your Super May Engine V2. A metal fork slipped from my hand and hit the tile with a sharp crack, just as the joke left Dylan's mouth. I was standing at the open door with a warm paper bag in my arms. The smell of fried rice and orange chicken curled into the hallway. On the porch, Mr. Liu's smile stalled, still polite, but his eyes flickered past my shoulder toward my son. I felt the air in the doorway turn heavy. Dylan leaned against the kitchen island, arms folded, half grinning, as if he had just said something clever instead of cruel. Sophie froze on the stairs with our cat pressed to her chest, her socked foot hanging over the last step. For a second, even the cat went still. "I'm so sorry," I said to Mr. Liu, the words scraping out of my throat. His gaze came back to me, and I watched him swallow something down. Not the food, not the evening. Something older, more tired than both. He nodded once, too gently, took the money with careful fingers, and handed me the receipt without looking at my son again. When the door finally shut, the echo of the latch sounded louder than his joke. The kitchen light buzzed faintly above us as I pulled out a chair, the legs thumping softly against the floor. Dylan stood stiff, arms crossed, trying to look older than he felt. I reached for the notebook I kept near the fridge, shopping lists, chores, unread reminders, and slid it toward him. "Sit," I said. He hesitated. The defiance in his eyes flickered, not gone, just wavering. Sophie lingered in the doorway now, half hidden, whispering something soft to the cat as if she could muffle the tension in the room. "You're seriously doing this?" Dylan muttered. "You're going to write an apology," I replied, "and you're going to mean it." He let out a dry laugh. "Mom, he's a delivery guy. He doesn't care." The coldness of those words hit harder than the joke earlier. I leaned forward, my voice low. "He cared enough to hear you. That's all it takes." Dylan shifted his weight. His bravado collapsed in increments, like a tower losing balance one block at a time. I placed a pen in front of him. The small click as it touched the table felt like the start of something he couldn't undo. "Right," I said. "A real apology, not one sentence, not something lazy." His jaw tensed. "Dad wouldn't make me do this." "That's exactly why I am." For a moment he stared at the blank page, the emptiness of it mirroring the sudden stillness in the room. I watched his shoulders sag, the first quiet sign of a boy beginning to understand the weight of his own words. Dylan pressed the pen to the page, but his hand hovered there, frozen. The silence in the kitchen stretched thin. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustle of Sophie shifting her weight in the doorway. Even the cat seemed to sense the heaviness and settled into stillness. "What am I supposed to say?" Dylan asked finally, his voice flat but thinner than before. "You start with the truth," I answered, "that you hurt someone who didn't deserve it." He clenched his jaw. "It wasn't that serious." The sentence slipped out with a dull thud, and something inside me tightened. I stepped closer and rested my hand on the back of his chair. He didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in either. The distance between us wasn't measured in inches. It was emotional, and it stung. "It was serious to him," I said. "You saw his face." Dylan's eyes darted up, then down again. He didn't argue this time. He just swallowed hard, the sound barely audible but unmistakable. Sophie shifted, her voice a hush. "Just write it, Dill." He shot her a quick glare, but it lacked force. The bravado was cracking, slowly, painfully, but cracking. He finally began to write. The scratch of the pen dragged across the paper, uneven and hesitant. Every line looked like it cost him something, and maybe that was the point. Consequences always do. When he paused, his fingers trembled just a little. "Is this enough?" he whispered, more vulnerable than defiant. "It's a start," I said. "Keep going." And he did. I picked up the second notebook and set it beside his elbow, the soft thud nudging him out of the small momentum he had gained. His shoulders tightened again. He looked at the blank cover as if it were a punishment all on its own. "You're writing 2 more, I said. "One on Chinese culture, one on how racism spreads." He let out a sharp breath. "Mom, seriously?" The edge in his voice wasn't confidence anymore. It was fear of being pushed further than he expected. I stayed steady. "You need to understand the harm," I said. "Not just say sorry because I told you to." Dylan dropped the pen onto the paper. It bounced once and rolled toward the table's edge. He caught it at the last second, fingers brushing the wood with a soft scrape. Something small but human passed across his face, a flicker of shame he didn't yet know how to name. "That guy doesn't even know me," he muttered. "He knows what your words felt like." His throat worked as he swallowed. A long pause settled between us, thick enough to change the air. Sophie stepped forward now, no longer hiding in the doorway. She placed a mug of water by his arm, quiet and gentle, and didn't say a word. The simple gesture struck deeper than anything I had said so far. Dylan blinked hard. "Fine," he whispered. "I'll write them." He opened the notebook. The first line came out shaky, but it came. And as he wrote, the stiffness in his back eased, not much, but enough to show the lesson was starting to land. The next afternoon, I parked the car in front of Golden Lantern Express, the restaurant's red awning fluttering in the mild wind. Dylan sat beside me, clutching the folded papers in both hands. His knuckles had gone pale around the edges. He stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the front door. "I don't want to do this," he murmured. "It's not supposed to feel easy," I replied. He shifted in his seat, the fabric squeaking under him. A small sound, but it cut through the quiet like a confession. Sophie had wanted to come, but I told her no. This wasn't her burden. It was his. When we stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed. Dylan flinched. The soft clatter of utensils and kitchen noise came from the back. Customers waited along the wall. A young woman at the counter glanced up, smiled politely, then looked at Dylan's stiff posture with quiet curiosity. Mr. Liu emerged from the kitchen with a stack of takeout containers. His eyes landed on us, recognition flickering. Not anger, not resentment. Something gentler, but still cautious. Dylan shrank half an inch beside me. "Do you remember me?" my son whispered. Mr. Liu nodded once. "I do." The papers trembled in Dylan's grip. He cleared his throat, voice cracking before the first word even formed. I didn't touch him, didn't guide him, didn't rescue him. This moment had to come from him, not me. He lifted his chin barely and began to read. His voice shook on every sentence. I watched Mr. Liu's expression shift, slow and steady, as the apology spilled out, imperfect, clumsy, but real. When Dylan finished, he held out the papers with both hands. Mr. Liu accepted them carefully, the way a person handles something breakable. "Thank you," he said. "That takes courage." Dylan blinked fast, fighting something raw behind his eyes. And for the first time since that night, the weight between us began to move. Mr. Liu invited us to step aside so another customer could order, and Dylan moved quickly, almost tripping over his own shoes. He wiped his palms on his jeans, leaving faint streaks where the papers had crinkled against them. His breathing was shallow, almost shaky. I stood beside him but didn't touch him. He needed space to feel what this moment meant. Mr. Liu joined us near the wall, leaning lightly against a wooden shelf lined with fortune cookies. His voice was gentle when he spoke. "That joke," he said, "it wasn't new to me." Dylan looked up, startled. "I've heard many," Mr. Liu continued. "Kids, teenagers, adults. Some laugh when they say it, some don't, but it always hurts somewhere." He tapped his chest just once, not dramatically. A small, quiet gesture that sank deep. Dylan swallowed hard. "I didn't think—" "I know," Mr. Liu said. "You're young, but words have long legs. They follow people." The line hit Dylan harder than any lecture I could have given. He stared at the floor, fingers tugging at a loose thread near his pocket. His throat bobbed again. His shame wasn't loud. It was quiet, real, and growing. Mr. Liu spoke softly about other nights. The beer can thrown from a passing truck, the slurs muttered through doors, the time someone mimed eating a dog while laughing at him. None of it was exaggerated. None of it was said with anger, just truth delivered in a steady voice. Dylan listened without moving. The color drained from his face. His breathing quickened, then steadied, then dipped low. When Mr. Liu finished, Dylan whispered, "I'm sorry for all of that. Not just what I said." Mr. Liu nodded, "And I accept." A simple exchange, but I saw something shift in my son, a quiet cracking open. We walked out into the afternoon sun, and the brightness stung his eyes. The house felt different that evening, as if someone had shifted the walls an inch while we were gone. Dylan walked ahead of me, shoulders rounded, hands deep in his pockets. The air inside held a strange stillness, not tension, not peace, something suspended in between. Thomas was at the dining table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when we walked in, his brow furrowing at the sight of Dylan's blotchy eyes and tight mouth. "How'd it go?" he asked, voice too casual. Dylan didn't answer. He headed upstairs without a word, steps slow but purposeful. The soft thud of his door closing carried more weight than anything he could have said. Thomas exhaled through his nose. "You really made him do it, huh?" I set my keys on the counter. The metallic clink echoed from the tile to the ceiling. "Yes, I did." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossing. "It was a joke, Margaret. You're making this bigger than—" "Stop." My voice cut sharper than I intended, but I didn't take it back. It wasn't a joke to the man who heard it. Thomas raised his hand slightly. "He's 13. Kids say stupid things. He hurt someone," I said, "and he needed to see that for himself." Thomas scoffed and pushed the chair back with a loud scrape. "You embarrassed him, in public." The word stung, embarrassed, as if embarrassment were the worst consequence a child could face, as if the humiliation endured by the man on our porch didn't count. "It's our job to teach him," I said, "not protect him from his own mistakes." Thomas shook his head, frustration simmering. "You humiliated him. Then maybe he finally understands how humiliation feels." He paused. The silence was long enough for the refrigerator motor to kick on, humming through the kitchen. A muscle in his jaw tightened, the only sign that what I said had landed somewhere deeper than he wanted. He didn't respond. He just looked away. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt us standing on opposite sides of something that mattered. Thomas walked past me into the kitchen, the floor creaking under his weight. He opened a cabinet, shut it again, then leaned both hands on the counter as if the laminate could hold up his frustration. I stayed where I was. The space between us felt cold. You didn't even talk to me about it first, he said without turning around. I didn't need permission to correct our son, I replied. He spun, the movement sharp enough to send a cereal box tilting before he caught it. You marched him into a restaurant and made him read something in front of strangers. Do you know how that makes us look? There it was. The part that truly mattered to him. Us. The optics. The family image polished clean, even if the inside stayed messy. It's not about how we look, I said. It should be, he snapped. Kids remember humiliation more than lessons. Maybe that's why the lesson sticks. His mouth tightened. A low, irritated sound slipped from his throat. He walked past me again, brushing my shoulder. Not a shove. Not gentle either. I held still. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said. He's not some monster. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. That's the problem, I replied. He didn't think at all. He froze near the doorway. For a moment, I thought he might say something honest, something soft. Instead, he looked over his shoulder with an expression I'd never seen so plainly on him before. You made him look weak, he said, and that's on you. The sentence hit low, just under the ribs, a deliberate strike. I felt my breath stumble, a tiny involuntary hitch. Thomas turned away. Satisfied he'd said something final. Upstairs, a faint sound drifted down, the quiet drag of paper, maybe the shift of a chair. Dylan, still awake, still processing. I stood alone in the kitchen, the overhead light humming like a thin, anxious pulse, and for the first time that day, it wasn't my son's words hurting me most. It was my husband's. Dylan wandered into the living room later that night, hair mussed, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He didn't see me at first. I was sitting on the far end of the couch, a blanket over my lap, the lamp casting a small circle of light around me. He hesitated when he noticed me, fingers twitching near the hem of his shirt. "Mom?" he said quietly. I turned toward him. "Yeah, honey." He walked over but didn't sit. He hovered, unsure, the way younger kids do when they're afraid of saying the wrong thing twice. "Mr. Liu?" His voice thinned. He went through a lot. "Yes," I said gently. I didn't know people said stuff like that to him. His throat bobbed. Real stuff, not jokes. I shifted the blanket aside and patted the couch. He sank down next to me, close but not leaning in. His fingers fidgeted with a loose thread on a cushion until it frayed. A tiny, nervous pull, over and over. I felt sick when he told me, Dylan murmured. Like, I did something that can't be undone. You can learn from it, I said. That's the part you can control. His breath trembled. Dad thinks you embarrassed me. I exhaled slowly. Do you think I did? He shook his head almost instantly. No, I embarrassed myself. I said something stupid. I didn't think about him hearing it. That small whisper of accountability softened something tight inside me. I nudged his shoulder gently. Growing up means learning from the moments that make you uncomfortable, I told him. And you faced it. You didn't hide. He blinked hard, eyes glassy but controlled. I don't want to be that kind of person. You won't be, I said, if you stay aware. A beat of silence stretched between us, steady, calm, full of something tender. Then he leaned the slightest bit toward me, the weight of his shoulder brushing mine. I'm sorry, he whispered, for all of it. My throat ached, but I kept my voice soft. I know. Upstairs, a door slammed. Thomas. The sound cut through the quiet like a warning. Dylan tensed again, and in that moment, sitting beside my son, I realized the divide in our home was no longer between parent and child. It was between husband and wife. Thomas came downstairs a while later, his footsteps slow but heavy enough to announce the mood he carried with him. Dylan straightened, wiping his eyes quickly, even though no tears had fallen. Thomas rounded the corner and stopped when he saw us together on the couch, close enough that our shoulders touched. So this is where you've been, he said. His tone wasn't warm. Dylan stiffened. I kept my gaze steady. We were talking. Thomas's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. About what? More lessons? The sarcasm curled at the edges like something burnt. Dylan shifted forward. Dad, it wasn't just a joke. Thomas blinked. Once. Slowly. Your mother got to you already, huh? The words came out sharper than he meant, but he didn't take them back. I saw the flicker of hurt cross Dylan's face, a small collapse in his expression, quick but unmistakable. He steadied himself before speaking again. I hurt someone, he said quietly, and I didn't even think about it. Thomas let out a scoff, but it landed wrong this time, too loud in a room filled with softer truths. You're 13, he said. People need to stop acting like you committed some crime. Dylan looked at him. Not angry, not defensive, but disappointed in a way that made my chest tighten. It matters, he said. What I said mattered. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched just long enough for the tension to shift. Dylan stood, shoulders squared with a new kind of heaviness, one earned, not imposed. I'm going to bed, he said. He walked past his father without waiting for permission or approval. Thomas didn't reach out, didn't stop him, didn't say a word. The distance between them felt sharper than it had all week. When the stairs creaked under Dylan's weight, Thomas finally spoke. You're changing him, he said, and I'm not sure for the better. I looked at him, the lamp casting a soft glow across his face, revealing the part he didn't say. He wasn't afraid for Dylan. He was afraid of losing control. The next morning, the house carried a different kind of quiet. Not peaceful, not angry, just tense, stretched thin like a wire humming between the three of us. Dylan moved softly in the kitchen, pouring cereal with careful motions, as if any sudden sound might trigger something. Thomas sat at the table scrolling through news on his phone, his jaw set tight. I stepped in, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Dylan offered a small glance, respectful, aware, older than he had felt even a week ago. Thomas didn't look up. Morning, I said. Dylan nodded. Thomas grunted. The air pressed around us until Dylan broke it. Mr. Liu said people throw things at him sometimes, he murmured, stirring his cereal without eating, like actual things, for just doing his job. Thomas finally looked up. Why are we still talking about this? Because I didn't know, Dylan said, voice steady but quiet. Thomas leaned back in his chair. You apologized. You did the whole performance. Enough. It wasn't the word he used. It was the disdain behind it. Performance. As if what Dylan had done was theater, not growth. Dylan stared at his cereal, shoulders sinking an inch. It wasn't a performance, Thomas scoffed. You're letting your mother guilt-trip you. I stepped closer. No one guilt-tripped him. He listened. That's different. Thomas set his phone down hard enough to make the salt shaker jump. The sound cracked through the room, and Dylan flinched before catching himself. He's 13, Thomas said. You're treating him like a criminal. He's learning empathy, I replied. Why does that bother you? Thomas's eyes narrowed, a flash of something defensive cutting across his face. It doesn't bother me, I just don't want him growing up soft. Dylan looked up sharply. Soft? He repeated, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. Thomas opened his hands as if presenting a fact. Boys need thicker skin. Dylan's voice wavered, but the tremble held strength too. Maybe they need better hearts. The room went still. Thomas blinked. Stunned by a son who suddenly sounded nothing like the boy he thought he controlled. Dylan pushed back his chair, the legs scraping across the floor with a rough, painful sound, and stood up straighter than I had ever seen him. I'm done eating, he said, and walked toward the stairs without waiting for permission. Thomas watched him go, expression unreadable. But I saw it. The flicker of doubt he couldn't hide, and under it something colder. He didn't like the man his son was becoming. Dylan didn't come back downstairs for the rest of the morning. I heard the faint thud of drawers opening, papers shifting, the muffled sound of him moving around his room with the restless energy of someone sorting through more than just objects. Thomas paced the living room, steps uneven, breath tight. He wasn't used to losing footing in his own home. When lunchtime came and went, I brought a plate upstairs and knocked on Dylan's door. He opened it after a moment, eyes red at the edges but calm, the kind of calm that comes after a shift inside a person. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Just thinking." I handed him the plate. Our fingers brushed, and he didn't pull away. "Take your time," I said. "Your mind's doing work today." He managed a small smile before closing the door gently, not shutting me out, just giving himself room. Downstairs, Thomas stood near the window with his arms crossed. He didn't turn when I entered. "You're proud of yourself, aren't you?" he said quietly, not angry, wounded. "I'm proud of him," I replied. Thomas pressed his thumb against the glass, tapping once, a restless rhythm. "You're driving a wedge between me and my son. That wedge showed up the moment you told him empathy makes him weak." He spun around. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." He walked toward me, stopping a few feet away, close enough to feel the weight of his frustration, far enough to keep blame alive between us. "You're making him feel ashamed," he said. "He should feel ashamed," I answered. "Shame is the thing that tells us we crossed a line." Thomas shook his head. "You don't get it. Boys don't survive the world by apologizing. They survive by not caring what people think." "That's not survival," I said softly. "That's damage." He flinched at the word, not because it was harsh, but because he recognized himself in it. A long, fragile pause settled in the room. "You're changing him," he said again, voice lower now, almost pleading. "I hope I am," I replied, "because he deserves to grow into someone he can live with." Thomas's jaw worked, muscles pulling tight under the skin. He wasn't angry anymore. He was afraid of losing the version of his son who had always reflected him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to raise a boy like that." I met his eyes. "Then maybe it's time you learn." Something broke in him then, not loudly, not visibly, but the way a beam inside a wall cracks where no one can see. Quiet, structural, and the house felt different again. I found Dylan later that afternoon sitting on the backyard steps, knees pulled up, sunlight catching the fine strands of hair on his forehead. He didn't hear me at first. He was staring at something small in his hands. The apology paper Mr. Aborsi Lou had returned to him after reading it. It was creased now, edges softened by the way he kept folding and unfolding it. I sat beside him. The wood was warm against my legs. He didn't move away. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think Mr. Liu really forgave me?" "I think he saw you trying," I replied. "That matters." He nodded, but uncertainty still lingered in the curve of his shoulders. He looked younger in that moment, not because he was a child, but because he was growing faster than he could understand. "I don't know why Dad's so mad," he said. "I'm the one who messed up." The honesty in his voice pushed at something tender inside me. A breeze shifted the trees, leaves brushing together in a soft whisper. "Your dad wasn't raised the way I want you to be," I said gently. "He learned different lessons." Dylan let out a slow breath. "Like not feeling things?" "Something like that." He traced a finger along one of the paper's creases. "I don't want to be like that." "I know," I said, "and I'm proud of you." He swallowed. His eyes glistened. Not tears, just emotion sitting close to the surface. It felt bad, Mom, hearing what happened to him and knowing I added to it. "That feeling is called empathy," I said. "It hurts, but it makes you better." Dylan rested his chin on his knees. "Is Dad mad at me?" "No," I answered. "He's scared." "Of what?" "That you're turning into someone different from him." Dylan didn't respond right away. He let the words settle, sinking deep into the quiet between us. Then he whispered, "Maybe that's good." I blinked hard, the sting behind my eyes sharp and sudden. I touched his hair, brushing it back gently. He leaned into my hand. Just slightly. Inside the house, a door closed. Thomas. The sound floated out to us, low and heavy. Dylan didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the paper, on the sunlight, on the future he hadn't fully stepped into yet, but was already choosing. And for the first time in days, I felt hope settle into my chest like something steady. Thomas stood in the doorway that evening, watching us from the shadowed frame as Dylan and I cleaned up the kitchen. The clatter of dishes, the rush of water from the faucet, the hum of the overhead light, every sound felt louder because he said nothing. Dylan dried plates with quiet focus, moving with a kind of calm I hadn't seen in him before, a collectedness, a clarity. When he finally walked upstairs for a shower, Thomas stepped into the light. "You're making him choose," he said. I froze. A wet bowl still in my hands. Choose what? Between us. The sincerity in his tone surprised me. No sarcasm, no anger, just fear stretched thin across his voice. I set the bowl down gently. "He's not choosing between parents," I said. "He's choosing the kind of man he wants to be." Thomas's face tightened. He walked to the table and sat heavily, the chair scraping. "I don't want him thinking he has to be ashamed of who he is." "He's not ashamed of who he is," I replied. "He's ashamed of what he said." Thomas rubbed a hand over his face, dragging down the skin, the gesture weary and frustrated. "My dad never apologized for anything. He'd say worse things, and he got through life fine." I leaned against the counter. "Did he? Really?" Thomas looked up sharply, but the defensive spark faded fast. He didn't have an answer. Not one he wanted to say aloud. "You think I'm a bad father," he whispered. "No," I said. "I think you're scared to raise a son who doesn't hide behind toughness." He held my gaze. The silence filled with all the things he'd never been taught, all the things he'd swallowed to survive his own childhood. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "You can learn," I said softly, "just like he is." His eyes glistened. Not tears, but something close. A crack in the armor he'd worn for decades without questioning it. "Where do I start?" he asked. "Start small," I said. "Start with listening." He exhaled slowly, the breath shuddering as it left him. Then he nodded once, a gesture quiet but real. Upstairs, the shower turned on. Water rushed through the pipes like a soft, steady pulse. Thomas looked toward the ceiling, then back at me. "I don't want to lose him," he said. "You won't," I replied. "But you might lose the version of him who never questioned you, and that's okay." He lowered his head, acceptance settling slowly into his posture. For the first time in a long while, I saw a man trying, not defending, not resisting, but trying. And it was enough. Dylan came back downstairs later, hair damp, wearing an old hoodie that hung too loose on his growing frame. He paused when he saw Thomas sitting alone at the table, not tense, not angry, just waiting, a rare stillness in him. I stepped aside, letting the moment belong to them. Thomas cleared his throat. "Hey, sit with me for a minute." Dylan hesitated, then pulled out a chair. The legs scraped softly, nothing sharp in the sound this time. He sat with his hands tucked into the sleeves of his hoodie. Guarded, but open enough to listen, Thomas watched him, the stiffness in his shoulders slowly unwinding. I shouldn't have said you looked weak earlier." Dylan blinked. It wasn't forgiveness, it was surprise. Thomas continued, voice rough. "I didn't like how it all happened, and I said things I shouldn't have." Dylan lowered his gaze. "I messed up too." "You did," Thomas said, "but you fixed it. That's more than most grown men do." A flicker of relief passed across Dylan's face, small but noticeable. Thomas saw it too. Something softened in him. "You know," Thomas added, leaning forward slightly, "when I was your age, Nobody talked to me about this stuff. Nobody explained why it mattered, and I turned into someone who didn't think about how my words landed. He paused. I don't want that for you. Dylan swallowed. I don't want that either. Thomas nodded slowly. The edges of his posture eased, like a man setting down a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. I'm trying, he said. I'm not good at this, but I'm trying. And then something unexpected happened. Dylan reached out, tugging at the cuff of his father's sleeve, a small gesture, tentative but affectionate in its simplicity. I know, Dad. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet wrapped around them gently, not like tension, but like a settling. I watched from the doorway, chest tightening in the best possible way. My son had grown in one direction. My husband, slowly, was choosing to follow. Can we try this again? Thomas asked. All of us? Dylan nodded. Yeah, I think we can. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. It wasn't supposed to be, but it was a step, a real one, a beginning. The three of us ended up in the living room that evening, not by plan, but by gravity. Dylan sat cross-legged on the rug, flipping absently through a TV guide he had no intention of reading. Thomas settled into his usual armchair, hands clasped together, elbows on his knees. I sat on the edge of the couch, the lamp casting a warm circle over all of us. No one spoke at first. The quiet felt different now, less sharp, more tentative, like a new surface we were learning to walk on. Dylan broke it. Can I show you something? He asked. Thomas glanced up. Sure. Dylan unfolded the apology paper. It was creased down the middle, the edges worn from being held too long. Mr. Liu gave it back to me after I read it, he said. He said I should keep it, so I remember. Thomas leaned forward. Can I see it? Dylan hesitated only a second before handing it over. Thomas held the paper carefully, smoothing one corner with his thumb. He read the first few lines silently. His jaw shifted, not in anger, something heavier, something humbled. This is good, he said. Really good. Dylan's cheeks flushed with a quiet pride he didn't show often. Thomas handed it back. You wrote that from a real place. I tried, Dylan murmured. You did more than try, I said softly. You showed up. He looked at me and then at his father, unsure how to hold the weight of the moment. Thomas rubbed the back of his neck. You know, when I was your age, I didn't even know how to apologize. He let out a slow breath. You're already ahead of me. Dylan absorbed that, sitting very still. A subtle shift happened in his posture, less guarded, more grounded. I watched them, my heart pulling tight and soft at the same time. Then Dylan said something that settled deep. I want to be someone who thinks before he hurts people. Thomas nodded. That's a good kind of man to be. The house exhaled with us, the air loosening around the edges. We weren't fixed. We weren't perfect, but we were moving. Together. Thomas stood up after a while, stretching his back with a soft groan. Dylan watched him, cautious but hopeful. I could almost see the question forming in my son's eyes. Is this real? Is he changing too? Thomas crossed the room, stopping beside the bookshelf where a small ceramic bowl sat half-filled with loose keys and receipts. He picked up one of Dylan's old-school ID cards, thumb brushing the faded photo. You were so little here, he said. Dylan made a face. I looked weird. You looked like a kid, Thomas replied, voice softer than I'd heard in days. A kid who didn't know anything yet. But now you're learning. Dylan shifted, unsure what to do with the compliment wrapped in unfamiliar tenderness. Thomas set the card down and turned toward him. You know, your mom was right to make you apologize. The admission hit the room like the gentlest kind of shock. Dylan blinked. I did too. I got angry, Thomas continued. Not because of what she asked you to do, but because it reminded me of things I never fixed in myself. He wasn't looking at me, but the words were meant for both of us. I didn't want you to feel what I felt growing up, he said. But I think I was protecting the wrong thing. Dylan's voice was barely above a whisper. What thing? Thomas hesitated, then answered with a kind of honesty that felt new. Pride. Dylan nodded slowly. Dad, it's okay to be wrong. Those simple words reached deeper than any lecture could. Thomas's throat worked as he swallowed, eyes glimmering with something unsaid. He took a step toward Dylan. You're growing faster than I expected, he said, but I'm going to try to grow with you. Dylan's lip wobbled just once before he steadied it. He pushed himself up from the rug and stood in front of his father. Not tall enough yet to meet eye to eye, but tall enough to stand as himself. I want that too, he said. Thomas rested a hand on the back of his son's neck, pulling him into a brief, awkward but entirely genuine hug. Dylan hugged him back with surprising force, as though relief had been sitting under his ribs all day, waiting to break free. I turned my face slightly, blinking away the heat behind my eyes. When they pulled apart, Thomas cleared his throat. How about takeout tonight? Something simple. Dylan cracked a tiny smile. Maybe not Chinese this time. Thomas laughed, a real one. Fair enough. The moment settled soft and warm between us, like something fragile we'd finally learned how to hold. Dylan headed upstairs to grab his hoodie before we left for dinner, taking the steps 2 at a time with a lightness I hadn't seen in days. When his door clicked shut, the house fell into a soft, unsettled quiet. Thomas stood in the living room, hands in his pockets, eyes tracing patterns in the carpet as if searching for the right place to stand. I walked toward the kitchen to grab my purse, but he spoke before I reached the counter. Margaret. I stopped. He rarely used my full name unless he needed steadiness. He came closer, steps slow, not hesitant, careful. I know I made this harder than it needed to be. I turned to face him. The lamp cast a warm glow across his features, softening the edges that had held so much tension. You were scared, I said. I felt it. He exhaled, the breath leaving him like a truth he'd held too long. I didn't want to admit you were right. That's not new, I said, a faint smile tugging at my mouth. He huffed out a quiet laugh, just enough to break the stiffness. Then his face sobered again. I wasn't taught the things you're teaching him. I didn't have space to feel anything. I don't want him to end up closed off, like I did. The admission landed gently but deeply. I stepped closer, standing just a floorboard's width away. You're allowed to learn with him, I said. You don't have to pretend you already know how. Thomas nodded, the motion small but full. It scares me, he whispered, being wrong. Being the one who needs to grow. I know, I replied, but look at him. He's not weaker for what he did. He's stronger. You can be too. He looked up, meeting my eyes with a vulnerability that didn't belong to a grown man. It belonged to the boy he used to be, the one who was never given space to feel anything real. I don't know how to start, he said. Start the same way he did, I answered, by listening, by trying. He took that in, letting it move through him slowly. Then he reached out, brushing his fingertips against mine, not asking for forgiveness, not demanding reassurance, just reaching. I'm sorry, he said. The words were quiet, earnest. And they eased something that had sat heavy in my chest for days. I held his hand gently. We're all learning. Footsteps thumped lightly on the stairs, Dylan returning, ready to go, a hint of excitement in his step. Thomas squeezed my hand once before letting go, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were standing in the same direction again. Dylan bounded down the last step, sliding the sleeve of his hoodie over his hand as he reached the bottom. His energy was lighter, a looseness in his posture that came only when something inside a child has settled. Thomas watched him with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time, a mix of pride, uncertainty, and something softer beneath it. You ready? Thomas asked. Yeah, Dylan said, stuffing his hands into his pockets. We stepped outside into the early evening air. The sky streaked with the last hints of gold. The breeze carried the faint scent of someone's backyard grill, ordinary and comforting. As we walked to the car, Dylan slowed near the passenger door. "Hey," he said, glancing between us. "Can we maybe try that new place near the shopping center? The one with the noodles?" Thomas paused, hand on the car handle. He smiled, not wide but real. Yeah, we can do that." Dylan nodded, relief warming his features. The small choice meant more than he realized. It wasn't about the restaurant, it was about reclaiming something, turning a painful memory towards something better. When we pulled out of the driveway, Dylan turned in his seat, watching our house shrink behind us. He let out a breath he'd been holding for days. "I don't want what I said to be the thing people remember about me," he said quietly. Thomas's grip on the steering wheel softened. "It won't be," he said. "It's not who you are." Dylan looked at him, surprised by the firmness in his tone. Thomas continued, voice steady. "You made a mistake. You owned it. That's the part that matters." Dylan swallowed hard and nodded. A small silence settled over the car, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The restaurant came into view, its warm lights glowing through the windows. People chatted at outdoor tables, laughter floating in the air. Dylan's eyes brightened, the way a child's does when the world feels safe again. We stepped inside together, the clink of utensils, the murmur of diners, the scent of fresh broth. It all wrapped around us like a fresh start. As we sat down in a booth, Thomas handed Dylan a menu, not with distance, not with tension, with care. Dylan looked at him, then at me, then back at his menu, and he smiled, a full, honest smile that reached all the way to his eyes. For the first time in a long while, our family felt like it was breathing in rhythm again. The server brought our drinks, the glasses clinking softly as she placed them down. Dylan wrapped his hands around his water, fingertips tapping an irregular rhythm along the condensation. He wasn't nervous, just thinking, processing, growing in real time. Thomas glanced at him. "You okay?" "Yeah," Dylan said. "Just a lot on my mind." He said it without fear, without the defensiveness he used to hide behind. Thomas nodded slowly, accepting the answer as it was. When the food arrived, steaming bowls, fragrant broth, noodles coiled like soft ribbons, Dylan leaned forward, inhaling the scent. "This smells amazing," he said. "It does," I agreed, watching the light return to his face. As we ate, the conversation stayed gentle. Nothing dramatic, just bits of daily life, school stories, small moments. But there was something different underneath. An ease, a new shape to the way we sat together, a softness we hadn't had in a while. Halfway through the meal, Dylan set his chopsticks down and wiped his mouth. He looked at Thomas with a seriousness that belied his age. "Dad," he said, "do you think people can actually change? Like really change?" Thomas froze for a heartbeat. Then he lowered his fork. "Yeah," he said. "I think they can." Dylan nodded. "I want to." "You already are," Thomas said, not with pride this time, but with respect. Dylan blinked, absorbing the weight of that. He took another bite, slower this time, thoughtful, present. Across the table, Thomas met my eyes. There was something there, recognition, gratitude, maybe even partnership returning after a long absence, a silent acknowledgement that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about raising a child who could hold empathy without fear. We finished our meal, and when we stepped outside, the sky had deepened into twilight, a soft gradient from blue to violet. Dylan shoved his hands into his hoodie pocket and walked between us, not leading, not following, beside. Before we reached the car, he stopped. "I was really wrong," he said quietly. "I know that now." I touched his back gently. "And you made it right." He looked up, eyes clearer than they had been all week. "I don't ever want to be the reason someone feels small." "That," I said, "is what makes you strong." Thomas nodded, echoing the sentiment without needing to repeat it. We continued toward the car, the sound of our footsteps steady on the pavement, and for the first time since this began, the world around us felt bigger, not frightening, but full of possibility. The drive home was quiet in the way families hope for, soft, steady, peaceful. Streetlights slipped across Dylan's face as he leaned his head against the window, watching the world slide by in gentle blurs. When we pulled into the driveway, he didn't open the door right away. He just sat there, hands folded in his lap. "Mom?" he said softly. "Yes? Do you think Mr. Liu ever felt safe? Doing his job?" The question hit deep, sharper than anything else he had asked. I paused before answering. "I think he's had good days and hard days, but what you did yesterday gave him a better one." Dylan nodded, absorbing that with the solemnity of someone finally grasping the weight of another person's reality. Inside the house, Thomas tossed his keys on the counter, the sound gentler this time. Dylan slipped off his shoes and stood near the banister, as if he wasn't ready for the night to end without saying one more truth. "I want to write him again," Dylan said. "Not because I have to, just to tell him I'm still thinking about it." Thomas blinked, startled, but the surprise softened into something else. Admiration. "That's a good idea," I said. Dylan offered a small smile, then headed upstairs. His steps were light, purposeful, no longer dragging with guilt. When his bedroom door closed, Thomas turned to me. His expression had none of the edge from earlier, only quiet understanding. "You did something right," he said. "We did," I corrected. He nodded, accepting the shared credit without resistance. The house settled around us, the kind of stillness that feels earned. We turned off the lights one by one, letting the darkness fall gently. Before heading to bed, I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked up toward Dylan's room. A soft glow slipped out from under his door, his lamp still on. Working, thinking, changing? I felt something loosen in my chest, a long-held tension finally exhaling. "Good night," I whispered into the quiet. Not to Thomas, not to the house, but to the boy upstairs who had taken a hard moment and reshaped it into something better. The next morning, a soft rustling sound pulled me from sleep. When I walked into the hallway, Dylan's door was cracked open. He sat at his desk, shoulders hunched in concentration, lamplight spilling across fresh sheets of paper. His handwriting, usually rushed, crooked, covered the page in slow, careful lines. I leaned against the doorway. "You're up early." He startled slightly, then smiled. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what he said, how words follow people. I stepped inside. They do. Dylan tapped the pencil against the desk. "I want to send him something better than yesterday's letter. Not an apology this time. Just something kind." I felt my throat tighten. "That's thoughtful." He shrugged, but the motion was tender, not dismissive. "I don't want him to think I only cared because I got in trouble." He folded the paper in half, smoothing the crease with his palm. The motion was deliberate, gentle. When he looked up at me again, his face held a depth that didn't belong to a boy who was 13. It belonged to someone discovering the shape of their own empathy. "Can we drop this off later?" he asked. "Of course." Downstairs, Thomas clattered around the kitchen, the sounds less sharp today. When Dylan came down holding the folded note, Thomas paused. "Another letter?" he asked. Dylan nodded. "A better one." Thomas didn't smile, but something softened in his eyes. "I'm proud of you." Dylan froze, not because he didn't believe it, but because he didn't expect it. Then he whispered, "Thanks, Dad," and tucked the note carefully into his pocket. Later, when we drove back to Golden Lantern Express, Dylan held the letter in both hands like it might blow away if he loosened his grip. He walked inside with quiet confidence, slipped the note to the woman at the counter, and asked her to give it to Mr. Liu. No speech this time, no trembling, just intention. When we stepped back outside, Dylan inhaled deeply, his breath steady and unbroken. "I feel lighter," he said. "That's what responsibility feels like," I told him. He considered that, then nodded with a certainty that warmed the air between us. Back home, he headed straight to his room, but not out of avoidance, out of purpose, growth. And as I watched him go, I realized the moment I'd been searching for since the joke left his mouth at our doorway. He wasn't running from what he'd done anymore. He was running toward who he wanted to become. The next afternoon, sunlight poured through the living room windows, warming the hardwood and softening the corners of the house that had felt sharp for days. Dylan settled onto the couch with a stack of homework, the kind he usually groaned about. Today he worked quietly, pencil tapping in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. Thomas walked in, holding a mug of coffee, pausing at the sight of him. "Homework already?" he asked. Dylan shrugged. "Feels good to get things done." Thomas smiled, barely there, but real. I like seeing that. I watched from the kitchen, the scene unfolding with a stillness that didn't demand attention but deserved it. The house didn't feel divided anymore. It felt aligned. Later, the doorbell chimed. A soft, unexpected sound. Dylan looked up, startled. I opened the door to find the young woman from Golden Lantern Express, the counter worker from yesterday. She held a small white envelope in her hand. "Hi," she said gently. "This is for your son. From Mr. Liu." Dylan stood so fast his pencil rolled off the couch. He approached the door with hesitance and hope twisting together in his expression. She handed him the envelope. "He said he didn't want you to feel like you owed him anything, but he wanted you to know he read your letter." Dylan swallowed. "Thank you." After she left, he carried the envelope to the couch like it was something fragile. He opened it carefully, fingers trembling just a little. Inside was a simple folded note written in steady handwriting. He read it silently, his eyes moving slowly, absorbing each line. When he reached the bottom, his breath caught, a quiet, broken sound he tried to hide. "What does it say?" I asked softly. He handed it to me with both hands. The letter was short. "Thank you for your kindness. I see the young man you are becoming. Keep choosing compassion. It will take you far." J. Lou Dylan wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed but also proud. Thomas sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. No lecture, no tension, just presence. "That's a good man," Thomas said. "You made a connection most adults never bother to try." Dylan nodded, pressing the note flat on his knee. "I won't forget this. Any of it." As the evening settled around us, soft and warm, I watched my son fold the letter and place it carefully inside his notebook. Not hidden, not thrown away. Saved. A reminder of who he was becoming. And in that quiet moment, I realized something I hadn't felt fully until now. He learned the lesson. And so did we. If this story echoed anything in your family, you can share it below.